Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another section of Collective Coaching. Very excited to be here with you today. And we have our guest, Jim Remley, that is here with us. He'll be popping on here any moment. And today we're going to talk about the NAR lawsuit, which I'm sure everybody has heard about and completely loves that it's happening. And more importantly, how do we adjust buyer representation moving forward? I think there's a lot of questions. There's certainly a lot of unknowns. And depending on how everything plays out, it could have an effect on the way that we manage our buyer representation and all that stuff. I'll say that, over the course of time, the only thing that we know is always constant is change. And this may have an impact on the way we do business. But for those of us that are prepared and take notes on what Jim has to say, we'll be better prepared than the rest. So as always, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A or in the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring that and asking Jim questions along the way. If we have time at the end, we'll do some Q&A as well. And with that said, thanks for joining us, Jim.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on this today.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on Halloween, nonetheless.
Halloween, nonetheless, and really interesting. Right now, as we speak, Inman's reporting that the verdict is about to be read in the case. That's going to definitely impact our business. I mean, if you guys are watching, you couldn't have timed your attendance any better than right now for this kind of event.
So the ruling comes down any moment.
Any moment. Yep. They just asked some questions, but it's going to come any minute. Yep.
Wow.
While we're on the call.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed for some good news.
Yes.
Either way, it's not bad news. It's just going to affect the way we go about things. So, Jim, I'll let you take it over. I'll turn off my camera.
Sounds great.
And we'll go from there. There's already some questions coming in, but I'll let you get started, and then we will go from there.
Okay, a little quick introduction. I won't bore you with my backstory, but my name is Jim Remley. I've been practicing real estate for 34 years now, and I've been fortunate enough to run some fairly large companies. I created a company, me and another guy. We grew that to 17 offices and sold that in 2006, did it again, built another company from 38 agents to 250 agents, and our company's been ranked in the top 500 companies in America. I've also had the privilege of teaching the ABR class, the Accredited Buyer Representation class for the National Association of Realtors for 10 years. And so I'm very versed in the buyer representation side of the business. And what we're going to talk about today is, how these lawsuits could impact your business. But even if you set those lawsuits aside, how we can elevate our buyer representation business and do a better job. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're just going to jump in, and I'm going to move pretty rapidly through this because I know we're smart people, and we've probably been keeping up somewhat to some degree. At least we've heard about these lawsuits that are happening. But I'm going to give you a little timeline, a little education on this. But before we do that, really quickly, let's go back in time. Let's go back in time for a second, all the way back to really the turn of the century. And back in time, before the Realtor Organization, back in the 1900s, early 1900s, before exclusive listings, it was the Wild West. And when you had sellers that wanted to sell their house, they would do what's called open listings. In fact, that was the norm. And what open listings were was just little or no cooperation between realtors. A seller would say, listen, I'll sign a listing agreement with you. It's open, meaning it's not exclusive with you. If you bring me a buyer, I'll pay you. Otherwise, you don't get paid. NAR didn't exist. There was no code of ethics. It was truly the Wild West. So an open listing, again, just the person who brought the buyer was the person that got paid. And homeowners back then would often have multiple signs in their lawn. They would have, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different realtor signs in their lawn because they had all these open listings. It was really crazy, right? So what happened? Well, what happened eventually is that realtors decided, hey, you know what? Why would I do all this work and not be paid? I'm not going to work for free anymore. So in the early 1920s, they started to come together, these realtors, and they said, first of all, let's form a realtor organization so we're more professional. That's going to advocate for cooperation and compensation between agents and create an MLS system. And today, in general, because of these kind of realtors that said, I don't want to get paid, I don't want to not get paid. I want to take a listing and actually get paid. Today, almost all of us take exclusive right to sell listings, right? So we have the seller sign. And when the seller signs it, not only are they saying they're only going to work with us for a certain period of time, they're also giving up their own right to sell their own property during that same period of time, which is kind of crazy, right? So here's a question. Do you think back then in that transitional period between open listings, wild, wild west, and getting a seller to sign exclusive right to sell listings, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to have the exclusive right over the next 6 months, 3 months, whatever. You don't even have the right to sell it. And no other realtor is going to take the listing. Do you think that was an easy transition or a hard transition in general? I guarantee you back then it was not an easy transition to talk sellers into that, because the norm was different, right? So for us and for them as agents, they had to change kind of their behavior. They had to change the way they went about their business. They had to change and start to do listing presentations and show value, with their clients. So clients would sign the agreements, right? And yet today, 100 years plus later, how many of us are still working with buyers every single day without an exclusive representation agreement? It's basically exactly the same as the wild, wild west in the 1900s, in that anybody can pick up the same buyer you're working with and sell them something, and you probably aren't going to get paid, right? We basically work with buyers under open agreements. It's like a handshake agreement. We hope and pray we'll get paid. We hope and pray they'll be loyal, but maybe they're not. And how many of us have had it happen when they're not loyal, right? So I want the foundational kind of thought process going through your mind of, hey, wait a second, you know what? Maybe Jim's right. Maybe I need to rethink how I've been working with buyers, regardless of these lawsuits, right? But I also want to walk you through the lawsuits and kind of walk you through that. So setting aside the lawsuit for a second, though, would we all agree that we should be doing these three things? That we should use a buyer presentation. In other words, we show people, hey, if you work with me, here's what you can expect. And when we say presentation, it doesn't have to be a 3-ring binder. It could be a 1-page sheet, it can be on your iPad, it could be just an explanation of what you do for people. The second thing is, would you agree that we all need to improve and systemize our service delivery when it comes to buyers? In other words, we want to create a way that we have consistent service delivery. It's not up and down. It's not high one day, low one day. It's consistent. And third, do you think we all should be asking for buyer loyalty? It's shocking how many agents don't even ask for buyer's loyalty. They just hope and pray it happens, right? And then maybe we take the step up eventually to actually saying, hey, and here's how I work. I work with an agreement, and here's what it looks like. And that's an agreement that we have in writing, an exclusive buyer representation agreement, just like an exclusive right to sell with a seller, right? So we would probably all agree in a perfect world, that's what we should be doing. So let's now take it into the context of what we're dealing with today, which is the lawsuits that are occurring. So I'm going to walk you through these pretty quickly. There's a question, of course, you can answer it, but we don't want to get bogged down in this because I really want to get down to some nuts and bolts of what you can do to improve your buyer representation business. So let's first start with the 2019 Sitzer Burnett. 2 different sellers came together, sued. They alleged that there was the sharing of commissions between listings and buyer brokers inflates sellers' costs and violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. They sued the National Association of Realtors, Realogy, which then became Anywhere, Keller Williams, Remax, and Home Services of America as all the defendants. Separate lawsuit, the Moeller lawsuit, basically says the same thing. These are the 2 major lawsuits that are progressing through the courts right now. Today, as we speak, the Sitzer Burnett case is probably going to get called. We're going to get a verdict here, maybe as we're talking today. So the plaintiffs, the people that are making the lawsuits, say, hey, we want home buyers to pay for their representation directly. We don't want sellers. We don't want to pay for somebody to, represent somebody's interest that's against and opposing to our interests. And both these lawsuits, as they wound their way through the courts, got upgraded to class action lawsuits so other people could join, and those settlements became exponentially larger, right? Another lawsuit, separate than the Burnett, Sitzer, and Moeller cases, is the 2021 case of Baumann and Noslak. So this class action lawsuit doesn't name NAR as a defendant. Instead, it names a specific MLS, the Shrewsbury, Massachusetts-based MLS PIN. MLS PIN's a huge MLS. It's the 8th largest in the country, more than 42,000 members in New England, and at 6 New England states and New York. So huge, right? The suit, like its 2 predecessors, sought a class action status and became class action, alleging that the sharing of commissions between listings and buyer brokers inflates the seller's costs and is a conspiracy in restraining trade and violates the Sherman Antitrust Act, as well as state antitrust laws. So all these suits get filed, 2019, 2020. MLS, just in the last 3 months, settled. So this MLS PIN settlement, which is a big one, where they make a deal and they say, okay, we're going to settle with these defendants. And as a part of that deal, MLS PIN agreed to overhaul its commission policies and pay $3 million in damages and cooperate in the litigation against the remaining defendants and the other lawsuits, including real estate franchisers like Anywhere, formerly Realogy. When you hear that name, by the way, Anywhere encompasses a ton of brands. Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's are all owned by Anywhere. Remax, Keller Williams, Home Services of America, big brands, right? Now, the court still has to approve of this settlement, but if it is approved, here's what the agreement calls for. That MLS PIN will remove a requirement that home sellers offer compensation to buyer brokers, and it will require listing brokers, when they're sitting with them to take the listing, to notify sellers that they're not required to offer compensation to buyer brokers and that they can decline if a buyer broker requests compensation. So the compensation can be zero. And if a buyer broker comes and says, hey, please pay me a fee anyway, the seller can say, no, we're not paying you a fee. You need to, pay your agent needs to be paid directly by the buyer. That's what they're pushing for. And that's what this settlement agreement has called for. Okay. Now, the Department of Justice steps in and they say, hey, wait a second, before we agree to this settlement, before you approve the settlement, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, says we have significant concerns with the planned rule changes under the proposed settlement. So they say, hey, we don't like your rule changes. That's not enough. They asked for the judge to extend deadlines for review of the settlement by 2 months so that the antitrust division could assess the competitive impact on the proposed settlement. So they're saying that's good, but it's not good enough. Now we're going to get to what they think is good enough here in a second. The pending settlements, now what happened right after the MLS PIN settlement and the separate Sitzer-Burnett case, which is being called today, guess what? In those cases, Anywhere, former Realogy, stepped forward and said, we'll settle. We'll settle for $83.5 million because we don't want this going all the way through court. We want to settle. We're afraid of what the other outcomes could be. Remax, a week later, settles for $55 million and agrees to change its business practices. And again, Anywhere also agrees to change its business practices. What changes? I'm going to get to that here in a second. But NAR strongly suggested, and they didn't fold, they didn't settle. They took this all the way through court for the last 3 weeks. They've been fighting tooth and nail all the way through the court system to try to prevent these changes from occurring. But then about 2 weeks later, during this case that's ongoing, NAR pivots and they say, no longer are we going to require that there be some level of compensation. We're going to say that BAC across the country in the 500 MLSs that are controlled by NAR or owned by NAR can be zero. So that's a big shift. That's a big change. For years, NAR maintained that in order to comply with the participation rule, listing brokers had to offer something. Could have been $1, could have been 1 cent, but now they're saying it could be as little as zero. The attorney's response in the Burnett-Sitzer case was this. The real problem at NAR is that listing a property for a penny, $1, or $0 will only further the problem pointed out by the Department of Justice that the MLS is a vehicle for the large corporate brokers to steer buyers away from low commission houses. Here's their argument, guys, just to put this in perspective. With the MLS PIN settlement, what they're saying is we'll allow everybody to put a 0 in the BAC, but the BAC is still going to show up when agents do a search. They're going to be able to see that they're only being offered 0 or $1 or $5 or 1% or 0.5% or whatever the number happens to be. The agreements with Anywhere and Remax also basically saying the same thing, the larger perspective of and NAR pivoting, saying, hey, we'll allow it to be 0 across the country. Department of Justice says no, because what's going to happen is agents are going to look at that and they're not going to show those listings. And that's not fair to the public and it's not fair to buyers. So what they want, what the Department of Justice is pulling for and pushing for is taking the BAC completely out of MLS. So it's not even there anymore. So when you go to show property, maybe there's an offer of compensation. You might have to call the agent, but maybe there's not, right? So they want that completely removed. That's what the DOJ says. 0 commissions is not enough. Evidence from other multiple listing services suggests that merely tweaking a buyer broker commission rule to allow 0% commissions does little to unfetter market from anti-competitive conduct. Attorneys for the Antitrust Enforcer wrote, the DOJ noted that there's a broker out in my area. I live in Oregon, and we have a MLS out here in our area that's called the Northwest MLS. They allowed 0 in their MLS a while back this year. And what they found was that about 97% of sellers, 98% of sellers still offer basically the same BAC as they used to. So it had little impact. Okay. So that's the argument here, is that the competitive pressures will still force sellers to do the same thing they've always been doing. And agents that do put zero are going to be unfairly, or sellers that put zero are going to be unfairly targeted as not being shown. Okay. Regardless of your thoughts, regardless of whether you agree, disagree, vehemently disagree, kind of agree, doesn't matter. This is by far the biggest change in the industry in decades. In my entire 34-year career, there's only been one other change that's this big, and this is bigger. The other big change is when we all stopped just representing sellers and we started representing buyers as well. When I started in the industry, we just represented sellers. In the early 90s, we pivoted and we started to represent buyers. This change is far, far, far bigger and will impact all of us. So the three possible outcomes, and we're going to see an outcome today. And just because we have one outcome here doesn't mean it's set in stone. Remember, we got another lawsuit that's bubbling up, the Mueller lawsuit, still coming through the courts. The Department of Justice still has to approve all these agreements, okay? So the three possible outcomes are business as usual, and a lot of brokers, and a lot of agents are just kind of head in the sand. They're completely tuning this out. They're just acting as this is not even going to affect them, and they're wrong. But let's assume that's the case. Business as usual. Basically, nothing changes. A settlement agreement is reached, which requires more disclosures to sellers about the BAC and the option to not pay BAC for zero, right? Everybody can do zero, but the industry largely remains unchanged as most sellers continue to offer the BAC. Kind of what's happened in the Northwest MLS, where they said go to zero, that's fine, but 97, 98% of sellers just continue doing what we've always done, okay? So that's one outcome that can happen from this. The second outcome is you have moderate change. A small percentage of sellers opt out and of paying BAC or offer a heavily discounted BAC. My MLS last week, we saw the first zero come through. And so definitely sellers are hearing the news. It's been all over the Wall Street Journal. It's been all over the news. The media is picking this up. And as sellers pick it up and they say, wait a second, why am I paying? Explain to me again, why am I paying for somebody's representation that has opposing interest to me? It's like having a divorce attorney and you're paying the other side, right, to work against you. Why am I doing that again? Explain that to me slowly, because I don't understand. You can see where some sellers are going to say, no, I'm not going to do it. So it's going to be zero. And there's such desperation out there for listings from listing agents that there's going to be a ton of desperate, weak agents that will just fold and say, okay, I'll take it. I'll take the 3% seller side. Let them fight over the BAC and figure it out for themselves. I just want the listing. You're going to see some of that. And we're already starting to see it in my MLS. You're going to start to see it probably, I would guess, in your MLS. But maybe it's only 10% of the market. Maybe it's 20% of the market. Then there could be massive change. The massive change is the majority of sellers come to the realization that paying for an opposing party's representation isn't in their financial best interest and choose not to pay a BAC. Probably won't happen in the next short term, weeks or months, but over the course of a couple of years, we'll see what can happen. So regardless of which of these outcomes takes place, do you agree that we probably should be proactive, right? We should get ahead of this and not be behind it, not have this directly impact us in a huge way. And the way you can do that is by getting ahead of the curve and looking at, hey, you know what? I've got to prepare immediately for a completely different compensation conversation with my buyers. Don't wait for them to make you do it. Do it now. There's no downside from you starting this work right now. So let's jump in. And by the way, just as this quick note, here's the trend line for commissions over the last 30 years. So 30 years ago, commissions were on average 6.1%. Now they're at 4.94. That's as of 2020. We don't have updated numbers as of today. I would guess it's a little bit lower than that. So when you see these laws start to come into place, or verdicts come into place, or just sellers start saying, I'm not paying that huge BAC anymore, do you think there's going to be more commission compression, that we're going to get lower and lower and lower? I believe as somebody that's been doing this 34 years, that's the inevitable outcome, regardless of what happens in the court system, that there's going to be competitive pressure on that BAC number. So again, we've got to redefine what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're charging, and everything that goes along with how we represent buyers, because the status quo is moving away from us. So it's going to start with seller conversations. We like to think of this as a buyer issue, but it's really a seller issue at the beginning. So we need to think about how are our seller conversations going to change. So I'm going to give you some examples of scripting of what you might do to change your seller conversation. Okay. So you have the option. And when we're talking to sellers, this will be one of my scripts that I would start using today. I wouldn't wait. I just do it today. So I'd say to the seller, hey, you know what? You have the option of compensating a buyer rep. And this means at closing, we pay them for bringing a buyer to the table and successfully representing the buyer in the transaction. Why would we pay a buyer representation? What's the reason for that? Well, for many sellers, it's going to boil down to just straight up exposure. Buyers will be much more likely to view your home if the buyer compensation fee is paid for by the seller. Now, looking at it from a competitive marketing standpoint, here's what I want to show to you. Now, here's what you're going to do. And this is a great idea. I took this from a top producer. He puts a pin on a map of where he's going to list the property. Then he draws a circle around it. Let's call it a mile, depends on your market area, 2 miles, 5 miles, whatever. And he says, look, check this out. Here's all the properties that have sold in the last 6 months within a mile radius or 5 mile radius of your property. I want to show you what buyers agent commissions have been being offered by sellers, what it looks like. So here's the data. This seller offered 2%. This seller offered 2.5%. This seller offered 3%. This seller offered 3.5%. But let's also equate this to market times. This seller sold in 3 days. This seller sold in 28 days. This seller took 120 days to sell. This seller's never sold. They're still sitting on the market offering a 1% or 0%. So really it boils down to exposure and looking at it from an exposure standpoint. I look at it as a marketing, a part of your marketing plan, your overall marketing plan. So that's one script that some top agents are using. The DOJ wouldn't like that because they're going to say that, hey, that's a violation of what we're just talking about here. But in my mind, it's no different than any other kind of marketing incentive you're putting out there for buyers or anybody else. It's an incentive for people to bring buyers to your property. You got to decide where you're at on that. But I have other scripts. So let's look at some other scripts. So another conversation could be, hey, the next thing we have to decide is if you'd like to offer buyer compensation. When we compensate a buyer's agent, it creates a competitive advantage of your listing, which in my mind will result in more showings, more offers. If nothing is offered, which is an option, and an agent's working with a buyer who may qualify to purchase your home, but they just don't have the funds to also compensate their agent, they're going to have to move on. They're going to eliminate your home from compensation or consideration, I should say. So we want your home to have the largest possible exposure in the market. So this is bringing up a bigger point, which is actually super huge. 1/3 of the buyers in the market today are first-time home buyers. The numbers just came out. 29% of the buyers in the market are first-time home buyers. That's a September number, by the way. So do you think a first-time home buyer, in addition to their down payment and closing costs, which are enormous, and the massive interest rate they're paying, are going to be able to afford to pay an agent another 8, 10, 20 grand? Probably not. My son just bought a house and it was a condo, $350,000 condo. There's no way he could have paid for a commission. So what happens if you don't agree to pay a BAC from the seller's perspective? What's going to happen? You're going to eliminate a lot of buyers. I would say at least 1/3 of the buyers, maybe 50% of the buyers in the market would be eliminated because they just can't afford to write the check. So when we talk about this in the ABR class, the accredited buyer representation class, the way we talk about this is when you think about the fee, the commission, I want you to think about this as a transactional cost, okay? And the sales price, whatever sales price we receive, is paying for everything. It's paying for your representation, the buyer representation, and other things related to the cost of sale. And the buyer has to agree to pay this transactional cost, the listing cost, in order for this to make it work. And you're in charge of setting the price so you can afford to pay those costs and those fees. So that's a great way to look at it. By the way, if a seller's opting not to pay a BAC, let's say you get a seller says, I don't want to pay it. Then we should say, okay, I need you to look at something just competitively, is that all these other properties that have recently sold, the sellers did pay a BAC and the appraiser is going to see that. So they're probably going to say, well, the actual net to these sellers was 2%, 3% less, whatever the number is. So why are we priced the same way? So if we're not going to pay the BAC, then it could be an appraisal issue as well, or it could just be a value issue. The buyer's agent, if they're smart, is going to check all these other properties and say, well, these sellers all paid a BAC. You're not. Why am I paying the same price? See, this gets really deep really fast, right? Here's some more conversations with sellers. So marketing strategies. Marketing strategy can be a conversation that goes kind of like this. You say, hey, now can I give you my recommendation based on what I've already told you? Is that where we agree to compensate and cooperate with a buyer's agent is really just a part of your overall marketing strategy. You have the option to not compensate a buyer's agent, but in my opinion, this could limit the number of showings and offers you receive. Our goal is to get you top dollar for your home. In my opinion, offering a competitive buyer's agent commission will encourage more showings and more offers. And so then you think about this from the standpoint of your listing presentation. Most of us, if we're strong agents, already have a listing presentation, right? We're coming in with a visually stunning listing presentation. If you don't have one, you should have one. So if you have a visually stunning listing presentation coming in, there's some things you're gonna have to add to that probably in the next few weeks, definitely before 2024. And that's going to be addressing this new reality within our current listing environment where BAC is going to be a question mark, right? So we want to create this new presentation now. Even if we don't pull the trigger and start using it, we want to have it built and ready to go. So let's walk through a couple of slides. I'm just giving you an example. These aren't exactly the slides you'd use, but some things you should think about for your listing presentation. So I would have a slide that's something like this that says, now we need to talk about, guys, the importance of exposure when it comes to the buyer side of the transaction. So exposure is super important. We want to attract more buyers, and buyer's agents really play a crucial role in helping clients find their dream home. Now, we have an option. We can offer to pay the buyer agent commission, and that's going to open your home up to a much larger pool of buyers. And it's going to help you stand out from the competition. With more homes in the market, it's important to differentiate your property from others. Paying that buyer agent commission can make your listing more appealing to buyer's agents who are essential to getting your property in front of the buyer pool, right? And the third, you're going to get a higher sales price. More buyers, in my opinion, if you get more eyeballs, more buyers coming to view your home, you're going to get a higher sales price. So more exposure equals a higher sales price. So we got to put this A, B, C. We got to walk people through it. So you could choose not to. So if you choose not to pay a buyer's agent commission, here's, I think, what the impact looks on that side. So I think you're going to have reduced exposure because some buyers just won't be able to afford to pay a buyer agent commission. And then they're going to have to eliminate your home from consideration. And that's going to be a big part of them going through the list of all the properties that are available in the market. That will lead to fewer showings, because fewer showings is a problem because you have fewer opportunities to sell the property. And then you get fewer offers because you had fewer showings. So limited activity, which can mean you get a lower price, which I don't think is in your best interest. Okay. So now you kind of are starting to think, hopefully, a little bit about sellers and those conversation changes that we should be thinking about. Now let's flip it over, and now let's get into the deep weeds here. Let's start thinking about buyers. Okay, how are we going to have this conversation with buyers? So number one, we're going to do something maybe we haven't been used to, and maybe we haven't even really thought of before, that we're going to start to do a buyer presentation, just like we do a seller presentation, just like we do a listing presentation. So I know that can feel uncomfortable, even a listing situation. So I'm going to give you some magic language to make it more comfortable for you. So when you're starting to talk to a buyer, maybe you've had your first appointment, you say, can I just take it 5 minutes before we see the first property to kind of show you how I work? That's a conversation. That's an easy layup, right? Another one could be, hey, before I take people out, I always like to just kind of explain my process on working with buyers and make sure you're comfortable with it. Okay. And then a third, another different version of that would be, can I give you a quick overview of the buying process in our market? It's changed a lot over the last few years, and it's changed a lot really in the last year. Kind of show you how that looks. And 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we're not going to take 2 hours. It's going to be concise and really direct and really simple, but we got to open that door to have that conversation. So that's 3 conversations. Now, when you're building your buyer presentation, what should be in it? What should be in this thing? Okay. Here's 10 things that should be in your buyer presentation. Okay. You ready? Number one, we're going to talk about the search process and finding them properties, right? The search process. And I like to talk about the number 2, the no stone unturned, which I'm going to circle back to in a second, which means you're going to look at unlisted properties as well. When you find a property, the research process, what a buyer CMA means, the negotiation process, the paperwork, the financing and the purchase, the timelines and contingencies, inspections and due diligence, inclusions, exclusions, and aftercare, meaning what you're going to do for them after the sale closes. So all of those should be components that are included in your presentation, in my opinion. Now, I want to circle a couple that are really important here, because I'm going to show you some stats here in a second, but because when you talk to buyers, buyers will often say, well, you know what? I can do the search myself, right? And you hear this from buyers today, and you see it as a TikTok, and you see it, people talking about this on Instagram and Facebook. Why do I need an agent when all they do is do a search, which I can do on Zillow or Realtor.com myself, and all they do is open the door to a house? Why do I need to pay them $30,000? Why do I need to pay them $20,000? So we've got to be able to answer that question and just demonstrate value, right? And if we can't do that, pretty soon our commission compression is going to get extreme, right? So we've got to say, hey, let me show you the value I bring to the table. I'm not going to say it that way, but I'm going to show it to them. So I'm going to say, so part of our process here is finding your home, obviously. So we're going to do the easy things first. We're going to set up a search pattern in the MLS. We're going to talk about haves versus wants, what you need in a house, what you want in a house. We're going to really get you zoned in on what you really want, your ideal dream house. But then I'm going to go several steps beyond that, because the MLS is the easy part, right? I'm going to leave no stone unturned. What that means is that I'm going to be looking at things that are unlisted. And those are sometimes the magic. Some of the best properties never hit the MLS. And I'm a specialist in helping my clients find those best properties. So here's what that looks like for sell by owner properties. Those are properties that are not in the MLS that are listed privately. I'm going to be out there researching those. I'm going to look at expired listings. Those are properties that were on the market maybe 6 months or a year ago, 2 years ago. And I'm going to be talking to those sellers, see if they'd be willing to come back to market to sell to you. We'll look at specific neighborhoods that you want to move into. And we'll say, hey, is this a neighborhood you like? I'll do mailings, I'll do contact, I'll do email blasts, I'll do social media posts, and see if we can unlock a seller that may be just about ready to list but hasn't quite come on the market. Then we'll look at coming soon properties. Now, our MLS has a coming soon section where they're not quite ready to go on the market, but they're almost there. But bigger than coming soon is just my relationships with some of the top agents in this community. So I will network with them and I'll talk to them about what you're looking for. And we do so many deals that way, guys. A lot of deals done just with networking in-house. So that's my no stone unturned. Have I already started creating value in your mind? If you're talking to me, I'm a different kind of agent. That's what I want to show to them, that yes, there's 2,000 other agents they could choose from, but they want to use me because I offer something different. Second thing is the research process. Now I'm going to say, and this is key language, guys, when we find that dream home, and we will, I'm going to find it for you, then my work really begins. Finding the house, believe it or not, is the easy part. So I'm going to give them that. That's the easy part. It's not really easy today, but let's just give them that. The next step is really where my work really starts. I'm going to do some deep research for you. I'm going to pull every permit that's been pulled on that house. We'll make sure everything's been finalized. We'll look at the assessor and see what's going on with the assessment maps and see what's going on with the taxes. We're going to look at the plat maps on property, look at the property boundaries. We'll do aerial maps for you so you can see it from the satellite view. We're going to look at the neighborhood, the trend lines for the neighborhood. Where's it been trending for the last 5 years? How is it looking that way? We'll also look at schools and shopping and proximity to other things, the walkability score. We'll look at all kinds of neighborhood factors that will really open up, your thought process about picking the right exact house. And that's where I really earn my dollars, is that deep research on every single property. You're going to know what the seller paid. You're going to know how long that house was on the market before they bought it. You're going to know what if they refinanced the property. You're going to have lots of data. I want you to be more knowledgeable about that house than the seller is. Okay, that's my goal. So now am I building value? Yes, I am. I'm building value. Then I'm going to talk about my buyer CMA, of course, how I'm going to do a buyer CMA for them, just like a seller CMA. And then I'm going to highlight my skills as a negotiator. And, here's where I really earn my money is helping you negotiate the best possible deal. Here's what I've done for some similar clients in the last couple of months. So that's where I'm going to really show off. Okay, guys. Now, here's some stats that came from the last study that NAR has done. And here's what buyers actually want from us. A lot of times we talk about things that they don't even care about. We're so focused on our egocentric stuff that we lose track of what is really important to them. So I'm going to dive deep into this. Okay. So my presentation has to cover these topics, which it does. The top 10 just does. I just showed you. But helping find the right home, a number one thing. So of course they still want that help. Help negotiating the terms of the sale. How often are you talking about negotiations with sellers and buyers, by the way? A lot of agents don't talk about that. That's got to be a major part of your conversation. Help with price negotiations. So that's negotiation twice, really. Help with the paperwork, help finding and arranging financing, determining what comparable homes are selling for. So you can see we've covered that ground in our presentation we were just talking about. So question, if you are an office leader, and one thing I do is I specialize in brokerage coaching. So I'm a brokerage coach, but I'm an agent coach, but I love helping brokerages grow and adapt to the changing market. One thing I'm coaching all my brokerage owners that are part of my system right now, I'm coaching them on building buyer presentations at a company level so they can disseminate those to the agents in their companies. So I'm just going to show you what our company's done. A little example of what our buyer presentation looks like. And it got to be very visual. We want it to look good, right? Of course, we're going to introduce ourselves, talk about being an advocate for them, the home buying process, what that looks like, our team, talking about finding their dream home. We're going to give them lender recommendations. We're going to ask them a series of questions about what they're looking for in their new home, the preparing for financing, the different kind of loan types that are out there. I love this page where we go deep on all the different loan types that are out there, the importance of getting qualified, the inspections, the negotiations, making an offer, all those things we're covering, closing day, appraisal, scheduling the move. So we're going to dive deep, right? What to expect, recommendations of vendors that we use, and then our reviews and testimonials. So you want to make it look good, right? You want to make it look amazing. And then I want to ask you this. So if your company is not doing that for you, and some companies do and some companies don't, I want you to just set aside that for a second and say, hey, do I have a buyer presentation that I built that's custom to me and what I'm doing? And I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to see if it's going to work, guys. I'm going to stop that for a second. And let me see if I can bring up some buyer presentations. You guys, let me know if you can see this. Just give me a little quick shout out there. I hope you can.
You're good.
Okay, you can see it? Okay, good. Thank you. So this is an example of one of my teams in the office. Is Jerry and his grandson working together, the Ehlers Group. And this is their buyer presentation. So they had a custom done by our marketing team. And again, you just want to really think it through. What are you going to put in this buyer presentation? Are you following the 10 steps that I've given you to make sure you're covering it? You want to make it super visual, super easy to cover. And I want to show you something just technology-wise. You notice what I'm doing here is I have what's called a flip book. Now, this is something you can all do for free. So you build your presentation as a PDF or PowerPoint. You can load it into the system, which is called Flip HTML5, fliphtml5.com, and we'll turn it into a magazine just like this. And there's a free version of it, and there's a paid version. The free version has some branding on it. The paid version removes their company branding, but it's so beautiful. It looks nice. The beauty of it is it turns it into a URL, which you can send or text to clients, which is amazing, right? So that's super cool. So there's an example of one that Jerry and Carter did. And I'll show you another one. Here's one of my good friend and also works with our team, Nicole Henderson. Again, a nice presentation here where she's introducing herself. Again, a flip book just makes her look like an absolute pro. So ask yourself, do you have a buyer presentation? The beauty of a buyer presentation, it becomes a prospecting tool as well. So when you build this out and you get this done, and I would set this as a goal to have this done before 2024, is once you've got it built and you've got your URL because you loaded it on the Flip HTML5, here's what you do with that. You take that and you email it or you text it to everybody in your database and say, guys, I just built a brand new buyer presentation to really talk to buyers about the home buying process. If you got 5 minutes, I'd love your opinion on it. See if there's anything I missed, see if there's any grammar or spelling errors. Love just get your feedback on it. Please take a minute and check it out. Now, what's going to happen? You've suddenly gone top of mind with everybody in your database. They may forward it on to other people. They may be encouraged to talk to you about real estate. It's a great, just simple networking and conversation tool that you can use with your clients. Okay, and now once we've got that built, I want to use what I call the 4-step sell system. The 4-step sell system I use with listings and with buyers presentations. So listing presentation, buyer presentation, doesn't matter. I'm going to use the same process. And here's what it stands for. I want to move up to subconscious selling. The reason why agents don't use presentations is because they're nervous and they're not confident. Competence leads to confidence. And how do you become competent? Is through practice and repetition. So subconscious selling means this. It's 3 steps. I'm going to first memorize what I'm going to say with each page. Now, when I'm talking to you today and I'm going through this presentation, it probably sounds pretty natural, I hope. And if it sounds pretty natural, you might say, well, how did that happen? Well, that happened because Jim has a script that he memorized and now he's personalizing it. So memorization is the first thing. The second thing is internalization. Internalization means I can move to any page in my presentation and instantly be comfortable there. I'm not going to freak out or fumble. I'm going to be okay. It's okay that I'm moving around. So I'm internalizing it so much. I'm like a football player that can pivot and move anywhere on the court. I'm a basketball player, I can shoot from any position. I'm comfortable enough with my presentation. And third is personalization. This is where I hit mastery, where if somebody asks me a question, I can respond to it smoothly, effortlessly. They're going to say, wow, this is the guy, this is the gal I got to work with. That's subconscious selling. How do you do it? You first write a script for each page, then you narrow that script down to a couple key pages, or a couple key phrases, then a couple key words. So now I'm gonna have a sticky note for each page, a couple key words. I'm gonna say it out loud. I'm gonna record it on my phone. I'm gonna listen to that over and over again for a 30 days straight. So every time I'm on my car, I'm gonna Bluetooth it. I'm gonna listen to myself giving my own presentation because I've used this kind of process. Over 30 days, you'll become a master of your presentation. Next, I'm gonna excite the client with visuals. That's why we have a visual presentation. We want them to see, not just hear what we're saying. People take in information differently, but if you have an audio and visual presentation, it makes it so much better. Lead with the client needs. Always find out what's important to them and focus on their needs and try to laugh and have fun. People love to have fun with people. Don't make it too serious, right? Okay, and a lot of agents make that mistake. So, but at some point during that presentation, you're going to have to also add something in. which is going to be an explanation of your buyer representation fees. How are you going to get paid from the buyers if in your market over the next 6 months, 30 to 40%, let's call it 20%, 20% of the listings start going to zero on BAC and remove it from the equation. If you don't have this conversation, what that means is that when you get to the property, you're going to suddenly have to say, oh, guys, I got to tell you, this one's not offering a buyer agent commission, so we're going to have to talk about how I'm going to be paid. You don't want to do that on a per property basis. You want to do that at the beginning of the relationship, so you don't make it awkward and weird. You're going to have it right now at the beginning of the relationship, so it's super clear and there's total transparency, right? So I'm going to say, hey, I need to talk to you about a couple things when it comes to how I'm compensated as an agent. So there's something called buyer representation fees, just like when you work with any professional. And what I am offering through the presentation I just showed you, hopefully you saw that, was expert guidance, extensive market knowledge, and really my big strength is negotiation power. So the sellers sometimes will take part in paying some fees. It's really variable. So some sellers may or may not pay the buyer representation fee. We'll know it depending on each property that we look at. For sell by owners, if we happen to land on one of those, again, some will pay a buyer representation fee, some will not. Same is true with expired listings, some will pay, some will not. It's really going to boil down to the seller preference. Some sellers simply don't want to pay the buyer representation fees, even in the absence of a specific circumstance. So they just refuse to pay it. So in that case, before we make an offer, you're always going to know, hey, is this seller offering to pay the BAC, or am I going to need to pay it at closing? And you can adjust your offer accordingly. Okay, so you're going to have this total transparency when it comes to each specific listing. Now, right now in our MLS, I will give the number. About 80% are offering to pay that BAC and about 20% are not. But again, every property you're going to see, you're going to know who's paying it, who's not. So there's going to be no surprises here. Okay, so think about that conversation with sellers, with buyers. I'm going to go deeper on that here in just a second. I know I'm starting to run low on time, but I really want to cover some key things with you guys. I want you to kind of think about this also from what I call a hospitality mindset with buyers. Now, remember that service is what I do for people. That's how I help them. But hospitality is how I make them feel emotionally, right? So I want you to think about when you're working with buyers today, what are your wow moments? Like, wow, they did a great job. Wow, I could never work with anyone else. Wow, I got to refer them to everyone I know. What are your wow moments when you're working with buyers? So I'm going to give you some examples. One could be a pre-meeting questionnaire. This is like a move-up level. How many of us have gone to a doctor? I went to a new dermatologist last week, right? As a bald guy, I got to go to the dermatologist all the time. So when I went to the dermatologist, what do you think they do? They say, hey, Jim, you either can come to the meeting 15 minutes early and fill out some forms, or we can text them to you and you can do them in advance. And so what if you started to move up to that level of representation? You said, hey, guys, if you can come a little bit early, I got a couple questions for you that'll really help me work with you and more effectively and really serve you at a higher level. Or if it's okay, it's cool with you, I'll send you a little email text and it'll just have a few questions to answer. So now I'm going to use a Jot Forms. Hopefully you guys are using Jot Forms. It's free. Or you can use Google Forms, also does the same thing. And you create a list of questions. Here's 5 questions that will really help me serve you better, right? So that would be an example of moving up to a real pro, right? Something that's different, not just the same old, same old. You can create evergreen drips that explain the process. What I love is a video drip that says, hey, let me explain all the steps involved in buying a home. And as soon as you get touched by a new buyer, you put them on the drip. So like, wow, this is cool. There's a 1-minute video talks about getting pre-qualified. There's a 1-minute video talks about inspections. There's a 1-minute video talks about, title insurance. You just walk people through the process of buying a home. This is going to impress them. They're going to really feel more comfortable with you. Homework for buyers, which I love, which is you're telling them, hey, here's a list of things you could be doing to get more prepared, getting pre-approved versus pre-qualified, starting to get yourself in position to get your deposit back from your current rental, thinking about cleaning that property up. There's a million things you can give to buyers for homework, right? And then gamification is when you're out working with buyers, how are you making it fun in the process? I love giving people a clipboard and 2 lines, one horizontal, one vertical. And I say, we're going to play a little game today. Everybody's invited to play it. Husbands, wives, kids, everybody. And as we get to each home, you're going to write down, 5 things you like about the house, 5 things you don't like about the house, if you can think of them. And then as we get to the second property, we're going to say, which one do we like better? If we had to eliminate one, which would it be? Going to mark that out. And as we get to the end of the house, end of the showings, we're going to get down to the last property. And we'll have marked them out. Like, you like 2 better than 3, 3 better than 4, 4 looked like it was the best property. Is this a property we'd like to write an offer on? Or we could play the price game. I'm not going to tell you the prices in advance. Let's guess them. Let's all have a little bit of fun here. So find ways to gamify the process. People love that. And then here's my favorite: social media follow-up really quickly. As you're showing properties to people and you're finishing up the day, you can say, hey, it looked like number 4 was your favorite property so far. Here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go back to my office. I'm going to shoot you a text, and it's going to have a link to that property, and it's going to give you the opportunity to share that with your friends and family, get their feedback on it, see what they think. Now, how do I do this? How I do this is through the social media platform. So if they're on Facebook or Instagram, I'm going to DM them through those systems, and I'm going to share the link from my website, not from the MLS, but from my website. I'm going to shoot them a link, say, I think this was your favorite property today. Feel free to share it with your friends and family. Now it's going to take them back to my website, right? And it gives me a great excuse to friend them on social. So there's a lot of different aspects to that. Now let's move up. Let's educate, and help buyers buy better, right? So this is my friend Will Brake. And Will's taken his buyer questionnaire, kind of the same thing we were talking about, created a PDF fillable form, which he emails to his buyers. Again, elevating the process, just like a doctor. And he came from the healthcare industry, so it really made a lot of sense for him. So he has a full, 3 or 4 page questionnaire. It's pretty exhaustive, actually, but buyers do it. They love it. And this makes him look more professional because he is more professional, and it can help them at a higher level. We, in our coaching program, have also created tons of checklists, tons of ways to improve buyer representation. We have a pre-buyer meeting checklist. We have an active buyer checklist, so that we're doing all the things to make sure that we're being consistent with our buyer representation. For teams, it's super important, but also for solo agents, right? Another one of my favorite agents, also a ninja coach, Shelly Culbertson, created a home buying process, which walks people through the kind of a flow chart of the home buying process. And she just works with buyers right through it. Another great way to elevate your representation. The video drips, which I mentioned a minute ago, I just want to walk you through that just for a second. I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but you want to make these exciting. And here's what you can do with these. If you got CRM guys, there's a built-in CRM drip, which sucks, and that's already been pre-built for buyers. You're going to get rid of that, and you're going to reload it with 10 video buyer drips, right? You can do BombBomb if you want. A lot of ways to do this, but hopefully your CRM supports video. And when you do these videos, you want to make them kind of sexy and fun, not just boring. Like, here's 101 on, inspections. You make it more exciting than that. So I'm going to give you a list of topics really quickly. Secrets to finding unlisted gems, mastering the art of real estate negotiation, researching properties like a pro, unlocking creative financing options, behind the scenes of home inspections uncovered, cracking the code on appraisals, the realtor's Rolodex access to exclusive listings, negotiating for added value, home upgrades and repairs, mortgage mastery, navigating loan options, and last, safeguarding your investments, tips for a smooth closing. Don't those sound more interesting? But here's the beauty. I shoot the video, 1, 2, 3 minutes, not long. And now it's going to go in my video drip, but I'm also going to use it on social. I can put it out on social media independently because it's an evergreen video. So I can get this kind of 2-for-1 special on my work, right? Here's another fun thing that one of my agents does, Adam McGrew. He has a stack, he calls them a deck of cards in his phone. He created these in Canva, super easy, super friendly. What he does is he's got all these stocks stored in his phone as a photo. As his buyers are going through the home buying process, now what he's doing is he's sending them a quick update. Here's an update. Your offer's been submitted. I'll update you as soon as I hear anything. Hey, nothing new to report. Everything's on track. Everything's looking good. I'll update you if anything changes. That's a good one, right? Here's my recommended lenders. Here's the next step on getting insurance for your home. So he just sends these little picture cards to people all along the way in the home buying process. Buyers absolutely love this process. That just makes it so simple, so clean, so easy for them. Now, let's talk about buyer representation, Greg. So you've done your presentation. You've demonstrated value, right? You've shown people, hey, I'm the guy you want to work with. I'm the gal that you want to work with. Now, at the end of that conversation, say, hey, there's 2 ways we can do this, verbally or in writing. At the end of the presentation, I'm saying, so does it sound like I'm the kind of person you want to work with? They say, yes, great. The only thing I ask for is your loyalty. So, I'm just going to ask you to shake my hand and just agree that we're going to be, working together until you find homes. Does that sound cool? They say, yes, boom, we shake hands. If you shake hands, 95% of the people will be loyal to you, but there's 5% that won't. We've all met those people. Because of what's going to happen with these lawsuits, now you also might have to go beyond that and say, and now I need to show you the documents that we use with all of our buyers, okay? And I'm going to show them now my buyer representation agreement. This is an example one, and I'm teaching a class in Michigan. If any of you guys live in Michigan, I'm going to be out there here in the next week or two teaching 2 live classes that are going to be covering this ground. So this is an example. So this is the Grand Rapids buyer exclusive buyer representation agreement there. And it's just a simple 2-page form that buyers sign. Now, when we're presenting this, there's a lot of fear around it. The fear doesn't come from buyers, by the way. It comes from who? The agents. Agents are afraid of it. If you are confident in your presentation and you say, hey, this is how I work with all my buyers, you will never pay me anything until we get to success. So it's really a success fee. If you find the perfect house, we negotiate the perfect deal, you know all the costs going in, and we actually get all the way to closing, that's when you're going to owe me something. Other than that, you're never going to owe me anything. You say it like that, they're like, oh, that makes sense. And by the way, notice what I'm circling here. By the way, I'm going to try to get the sellers to pay my fee for you. So if the seller pays me anything, it's going to offset any of these fees that we're talking about today. So in a lot of cases, they're going to pay the whole thing. But again, you're going to know on every single property we look at what's going on. It's going to be total transparency. Now, that's where you get to confidence, right? That's where you move up, and you got to start practicing it. It's a practice thing. I'd find somebody in your office and practice and role play that with, and start using it. So here's an example of what's happening in the market just today, even before all these laws. This is as of 2022, buyer representation agreements. Yes, all 35% of agents work with all their buyers under a written agreement. So already, a third of agents are using these agreements, right? So if you're not using it, you're kind of maybe behind the curve already. 18% use a oral agreement, 34% no, and 14% are just clueless and they don't know. How they don't know, I don't know. And then who's paying?
That's funny.
It is funny, right? Paid by seller 48%, paid by buyer and seller 14%, paid by buyer only 28%. So again, a third of these fees are being paid by buyers today nationally. So it's not like it's just all sellers across the country. And so what might start to happen, just kind of like we do with sellers a lot of times, it might start to be that when we go to a seller's house and we have an offer, we say, oh, and here's an estimated net sheet. You can see what you're going to net. We do that a lot with sellers. But we might start doing this with buyers. Say, here's the house that you're looking at. I worked with Jolanda this morning. We did an estimated good faith that includes the buyer representation fee on this property. Here's what your total cost all in on this property would be. I can see that happening pretty soon, that we might start going down that road, right? That could be a possibility. Now, your biggest clients already get it. These are two examples right here that me personally, in my own market, because I'm working full-time as a coach, I'm not in the market as I once was. So I hire agents to represent me in my own market. So I've got a great guy that represents me right now. And this year I bought 2 apartment complexes. Now, how did he find these apartment complexes? He found them through doing mailings to apartment owners. And how did he do that? How could he afford to do that if he didn't know he was going to be paid? He couldn't. So I signed a buyer agent commission agreement with him. So he knows he's going to get paid. If he finds me something and I buy it, we don't have to bother the seller. We're just going to make the offer. Don't have to talk to the seller about the buyer agent commission because I'm paying it. I'm happy to pay it. I bought a 10plex and 11plex using that. The biggest clients you have will absolutely get this without problem. Now, the lower tier clients where they're kind of money soft and it's a little challenging, it is going to be a different conversation. There's no question. So I want to share with you really quickly one thing here, which I thought was really fun. And this is for all of you that need to take a baby step into this. This is a baby step. I was in South Carolina teaching a class at a convention this year. And while I was there, I also had a need to do a 1031, and I couldn't find a property because, there's not a lot of properties in the market. So I reached out to a few agents while I was in town and looking for a 1031 exchange. And I didn't get a lot of immediate response, but I did land on some people's, email lists like we all do. And so this gentleman, Paul, reached back out to me. He basically went through his entire cold email list this year, just recently, sent me this email, and it basically said, hey, you know what? If you're still looking, I've got some exciting exclusive opportunities that might help fit your needs. If you want to reach out to me and schedule a consultation, push this button. If you want to join my VIP list, push this button. What did I do? I'm still in the market to buy properties. I'm looking at other states. I said, let's do it. I'm gonna schedule a consultation with Paul. So I scheduled a consultation, 15 minutes. By the way, it would link to his Calendly, and boom, I just picked my time on his Calendly account. All of you should be doing this every day, guys. So it just went right onto his schedule. And then I met with Paul. Paul had this conversation. He said, Jim, I work with a lot of people and high-level investors like you. And so I have a lot of opportunities to bring them properties that are not on the market, unlisted properties. Are you interested in unlisted properties? I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, well, I'm going to send you a few documents to sign. And then I'll just keep my eye out for any properties. Okay. Now, what did you think he sent me? And this should be true of any of you that have this conversation. The conversation is simply this with buyers. guys, would you like to see unlisted properties? They're all going to say yes. I'm going to say, great. In order for me to show you unlisted properties, there's a couple documents I'll have to have you sign. And they're pretty simple. And if you have any questions, let me know. Here's what he sent to me. He sent me, first of all, the agency documents, but he also sent me, boom, exclusive buyer representation contract. What does it say on here? Hey, the general description is any off-market, detached, attached to multifamily homes, land, or commercial property brought to buyer's attention by the broker, right? All properties in these price ranges, and he gave the counties. Then what's the fee he's charging? He chose to charge 3%. And how long was it? 365 days. I like this guy, man. He's all in. It's a full year, brother. Man, you got this, man. This is amazing. And what do you think I did with that? I signed it. I don't care if he's bringing me an unlisted property, which I wouldn't find anyway. Of course, I'm going to sign it. Why wouldn't I sign it? There's no downside for me as a buyer. Your buyers that are high level will sign this thing, and they will have no problems with it whatsoever. Again, a lot of this comes down to our fear, not the client's fear. So lots of other strategies we could get into, but that's probably all the time we have. I'm happy to take questions, guys, and I'm just going to flip up here real quickly to this. I'm going to give you guys a link that will give you this entire presentation, and even the slides I didn't get a chance to cover. You're going to see it's going to talk about some other things I'm doing in Michigan. You guys are kind of getting a sneak peek of the live class I'm doing in Michigan, so just ignore that. If you want a free copy of this entire presentation, just grab that link. And if anybody's interested in coaching, we've got an amazing fall special we're doing. It's $1 for your first 30 days of coaching with me. And that will show up in this link when you're doing it. If any of you are brokerage owners and would like to talk to me about brokerage owner coaching and how we can help you recruit and retain amazing agents in your market, please reach out to me directly. And you guys can all find me on my social media handles is Real Estate Coach, E like elephant. And my website is also E as an elephant, realestatecoach.com. But I'm here to take questions, guys.
Jim, that was really, really well done.
Thank you.
Your phone might be blowing up as the ruling did come in already.
Okay. What did it say?
NAR lost.
Yep. There you go.
Yep.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. Couple of questions for broker owners in regards to most likely copycat lawsuits. One, do you see that happening? Do you recommend calling your insurance agent and finding out their antitrust policy regarding litigation and damages covered?
I don't believe E&O coverage will cover this. In fact, I would be 90% sure it won't. You can certainly make the call. It doesn't hurt to make the call. I don't see them targeting individual brokerages. I think they're going after the deep pockets being major franchisors, not necessarily independent franchisees. And I also see, and going after NAR obviously being a deep pocket. I don't see them going after mom and pop level brokerages. I don't think they're going to do that.
Next question is, does this mean MLS will go away because there isn't brokering agreement compensation?
No, I don't believe so.
Really
MLS is crucial for marketing. It's just going to be a different. It's just going to relate to the buyer compensation issue. I don't think it'll result in MLS. I will tell you. This is a whole another huge topic. Is that NAR's membership itself is being threatened right now. A lot of the agreements that are being done, the Anywhere agreement, which is the call with Century 21 brands, all those brands, and the RE/MAX agreements, both included verbiage which said that they were going to give their franchisees and their agents the option of not being NAR members. So that's massive, hundreds of thousands of agents that may be given that option. When you give agents that option, there's going to be a lot that don't do it.
Yeah, and the associations do kind of strong arm you as a brokerage, meaning if you're a realtor organization, then all of your agents have to be part of the association. So interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yep.
Billy asked if we can get the slides. You shared the QR code for that. And then Anonymous said, can you quickly speak to the verdict since it just came in? All I know, I think it's too soon to speak to it. I don't know, Jim, if you have any thoughts. There was over $1 billion in fees and $2 billion in damages. That's all I know. I haven't read more yet, but
probably the result will be an appeal.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's an appeal coming.
There'll be appeals, and it'll probably take another year or so to unwind those appeals. But the writing's on the wall, and I would just say, don't wait for the shoe to drop. The shoe's already dropped. It's just a matter of time. So we just got to adjust as if it's already going to happen. And as long as we're just starting to get proficient and starting to adapt early, we're going to be, if we're early adopters in these things, we'll be ahead of the curve.
Agreed. And I'll say, Jim, what I really liked about your presentation and what I've been saying to agents I work with is regardless of where this goes, what it does change is the way we communicate. And this is a communication shift. It's an expectation shift. I think you've done a great job of laying out ways that we can, show and add value. So, we got to be versatile and we got to be ready for change. And when you get your dialogue and your scripts down, that should really help. Someone's asking if you can put the QR code back up for the link.
Yep.
And then someone else is asking if you want the code for, the presentation, here's the link. Also, this is being recorded. We'll make it available inside of Suite Assist and Collective Coaching. So you'll be able to replay it. Obviously, if I'm you, I'm scanning that code and figuring out how I can get more of Jim's brilliance in my life. Next one is, I was told last week that California RPA discloses the sharing of commissions and it should not be a problem in California.
Wrong. That's wishful thinking by the CAR.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's always been disclosed.
Yeah.
California is a very litigious state, might go a little bit deeper in the disclosure process. Next question, won't lenders realize the buyer fee needs to be paid and allow the appraisal to include the fee?
I do think that I've been talking to a lot of high level lenders. In fact, I was just on, I had Jeff Fitzer on my podcast yesterday, who runs Lab Code Agents.
Our dude, really good friend of mine.
Great guys. And we were talking about that, about definitely lenders are going to have to pivot. There's going to have to be some level of financing for these buyer agent commissions. There's just going to have to be. And so it's going to be a whole interesting conversation because, today the appraisal covers the buyer agent commissions, but what happens when that's not a part of that? Are they going to have some kind of separate loan for that, or how are they going to work that out? It's going to have to be worked out because a third of the buyers are not going to be able to afford it. First time home buyers are not going to be able to afford it.
At least a third, yeah. Look, this is going to be an industry-wide team effort, from lenders to appraisers to great thought leaders like Jim and you getting ahead of the curve. And don't allow this to scare you. Allow this to motivate you to be better and learn the conversations. And, at the end of the day, we get paid what we get paid for having difficult conversations. And for some of us that aren't prepared, this is just going to be a difficult conversation that, as Jim said, with enough practice, you start to, when you're competent, you'll build the confidence. So let's rewatch this. Let's be prepared and let's do the best we can to serve ourselves, our family, our clients, and everyone in between. Jim, that was fantastic. I'm going to have Mike Cuevas connect us because I think there's a few things we can do together that should be a lot of fun and create opportunity for us to help a lot of agents and brokerages. I appreciate your time. Enjoy Halloween.
Thank you.
And everyone that joined us, thank you. We will see you next Tuesday at the same time. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.